Hello and welcome to the College Sports Hive. I'm Leaf Thulin, and this is another edition of Thulin's Takeovers. This one's coming out on a Thursday because I'm lucky enough to be joined by one of the most knowledgeable college hoop fans I know, and Mark Cundiff. Marky Futures on Twitter, and he's here with me to talk contenders and pretenders on the College Sports Hive. Hi, Mark, and thanks for joining me today. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me, Leaf.
Of course, my pleasure. Today we're going to be talking about, to the best of our abilities, the super difficult question of contenders versus pretenders and where we anticipate different teams going in the tournament and see if we can pinpoint any dark horses. And lastly, we will try to pinpoint who will comprise the All-American teams, both first team, second team, and third team. So I'll get us started on the foot that I think a lot of people will be going after. We saw some great matchups yesterday. We've still got, I think we've got a top four kind of locked in. We've got our one seeds. Let's briefly go over each one and why they're so good. And please let me know if you do, because I feel like these are all contenders. All four of the top four seeds, Gonzaga, Michigan, Baylor, and Illinois, I think are really good basketball teams. And I assume you feel the same way. So let's just go over a few of these teams and why we think they are contenders, unless you do not think one is a contender.
I totally agree. I think those are the four probably main title contenders. So I'm on the same page with you. To start with Gonzaga, I think they have three probably All-Americans in their starting lineup, which I don't know if anyone has that. So they're pretty loaded there. And then you bring in like a guy like Nembhard off the bench, who's just phenomenal off the bench. I think he's fit great with them.
And one thing I've noticed as well about Gonzaga is one of their best players is Joel Ayayi. And he's super integral to their winning, but he's not going to be an All-American, but he might be their second highest draft pick, or third highest draft pick, excuse me. I think what makes Gonzaga so special in my eyes is that they can score on you, but their defense is better than years past. And adding Jalen Suggs, they have an addition of transition offense rather than just this meticulous, beautiful offense that they've ran for years in the Mountain West. Do you see that as well, and think that makes them a true national title contender as opposed to years past where they've been one seeds but they don't seem as good and as deep as a team?
Absolutely. That's I think from the first game of this season when they played Kansas, they've never had a Jalen Suggs type of player there, and I think the addition of him gives them I definitely think they're the favorite to win it all still. So yeah, I really like their team.
Yeah, and I think that they've done nothing wrong in the sense of getting themselves to an undefeated record, the lone undefeated remaining. And I'll talk about the next team that I want to talk about, although they're ranked number 3 right now, and they may be moving back up to number 2, is Baylor. I see them on an even tier with Gonzaga. And that's just because their guard play is so good. And they also have All-American candidates, in my opinion, in Jared Butler and Davion Mitchell. And the rest of their team can shoot and play defense. Do you think – you just said that Gonzaga is your favorite, which makes sense, and they're phenomenal. Do you think that Baylor's on an even tier or just slightly behind? And what are some differences between those two in your eyes?
For me right now, I would say they're slightly below. I'm interested to see how Baylor looks, for the rest of these next couple games and then into the Big 12 tournament. They looked, and you probably agree with me, they looked a little sluggish, but I saw a thing that they didn't practice for 18 days. And, they had a 21-day pause. So they're obviously going to look a little games. But, yeah, Butler and Mitchell are phenomenal. And then, to bring a guy like Matthew Meyer off the bench is, that guy's instant offense. So.
Yeah, and then one thing I noticed is, and I agree with you, I think they looked sluggish. They came off a pause. They had a long time where they were not playing. And the difference between them and Michigan, who we'll get to in just a second, is Michigan was doing it out of caution. They're being cautious and trying to keep themselves safe. And so they were not impacted by the virus, whereas Baylor had 8 players impacted by the virus. And to what extent, we don't know. But, I don't think Jared Butler is going to score 0 points for the majority of a game like he did against Kansas. Kansas is great defensively. They got Marcus Garrett, but Jared Butler, last game against Kansas, scored 30. And what impressed me is that just the resilience in playing a game against West Virginia where they they're playing a team that runs up and down, has a guard in Miles McBride who also could be an All-American, and they were able to persevere through that game with Taz Sherman and Sean McNeil hitting unbelievable amounts of shots. And I saw the sense that they win that game and they believe again. And that's what puts them, in my eyes, on the same tier as Gonzaga, because I only assume they're going to get better off of this pause. I think they're a step ahead of Michigan. Let me get your read on that. Do you think that Baylor is 2 behind Gonzaga, and they're those two are on a tier above Michigan and Illinois? Because obviously Illinois just handed Michigan a bad loss without Ayo Dosunmu. So first, let me phrase this question: who do you think is the better team between those two? And secondly, where do you rank those two teams in comparison to the 2 prior ones we've discussed?
Well, I think those two are pretty even. I may still give Michigan a slight notch above, but I think Michigan, I don't think they played great. They had a bad game, but their front line, they have so much size up front, and like we said with Gonzaga, they've never had a Suggs. Michigan adding Dickinson to that group. Hunter Dickinson he's terrific. He gives them a legit true post player who is really good. And then Franz Wagner, as we talked about the other day, he's a really good two-way player. Great defender. He can score. Then you have Livers. The one worry I have possibly for Michigan is their backcourt. Their backcourt has been really good all season, but if they were to slip up, possibly their backcourt. But they're a really connected team, playing great. And yeah, I like Michigan a lot.
Yeah, and I think I agree. I think holistically, I believe Michigan is more in sync, than Illinois. I think Illinois has these spurts where they play an amazing game. Like, they played with Ayo Dosunmu out and handed Michigan that game. Like, they were in complete control from, it felt like from the first media timeout. They had made a few adjustments. Curbelo came in the game, and the rest of the way Illinois was in control. I worry that they have these lapses, though. We've seen them play a few games, even a few halves, where you're a little concerned. And Michigan, that was their only second time where they've lost, obviously, but also the only second time where they've been outplayed in a half. So I know you follow Illinois closely. Can you take me through how much of a contender you see the Illini as? And secondly, where do you think the key to that team is?
Well, I'm assuming Ayo's going to come back. He's been out. I'm guessing maybe the Big Ten tournament. I probably would let him sit that last game and bring him back for the Big Ten tournament. But as far as just to start off, the duo of Ayo and Kofi, I don't know if there's a better duo in the country than those two. So when you start with those two, you're off to a good start. Then Trent Frazier's playing really well. He's really defending. He's scoring. He's actually attacking the basket now, which is huge, which he wasn't doing it in the beginning of the season. He was, kind of a catch and shoot guy. He's attacking more, which, he to me is him and Curbelo are the 2 wild cards for that team. I think Illinois needs more players to play well, almost, because like you said, and it's so true, they go through these lapses sometimes where, like the Northwestern game, they fall behind, 20 or so, 15 to 20 at halftime. It's going to be tough to do that in a tournament and expect to just come back. So, if they can stay consistent, I definitely think they're a title contender, but they're, they do go through lapses like that. Their defense has been better. But yeah, the way Trent Frazier has been playing, I think he kind of gives me even a new outlook on Illinois. And then, Curbelo off the bench when he's under control, and he's tough to stop because he's always in attack mode. So.
Yeah, and Illinois, when I watched that game yesterday, the thing that stuck out to me is one, how physical they were. Obviously, you got Kofi Coburn, who's just an intimidating presence in the paint. But then you have Grandison. You've got DeMonte Williams really fighting against guys in Livers and Wagner, who I would say are more talented, but they didn't back down. And then you had Curbelo, even without Ayo Dosunmu, Curbelo and Trent Frazier played great games in which they were like, hey, these guards aren't as good as us. And that's something that, like you said about Michigan, that Mike Smith is a good player. Eli Brooks is a good player. But I think that you take out an All-American, Ayo Dosunmu, and you have two players in the Illinois backcourt that are still better than the two guards in the Michigan backcourt. And I think the tournament is guard driven. Like you want to have good guards more than you want to have good forwards. And I don't think that that's necessarily a knock on Michigan per se, but I think it makes me higher on Illinois than I was entering that game, because with Ayo out, you're seeing teams get better. You're seeing players on that team get better, which will elevate the team and make them more confident when Ayo is back. So I think we're pretty settled. Those are the four best teams in college basketball. And unless there's someone else that you have coming up here, I would like to get your pick on some of the rest of the top 10 guys to see who are the pretenders and contenders, because I think those are legitimate contenders.
Yeah, let's move on to that, because I totally agree with you with those top. I think those, we agree on that. I think those are the top four.
Yeah, so of those, I've got one more question for those top four, actually. Of those top four, who do you think is the most susceptible to losing early in the tournament?
Man, that's tough. I'm going to go Michigan on that. And for the reasons that we just talked about, as far as those, it's a lot of pressure on those guards too. And like we said, even though they've been great all year, I just think I have a little more faith in those other three teams the guards on those other three teams. But yeah, I'll go Michigan on that.
Yeah, and I'm between Michigan and Illinois. I just think that if you have a spurt where Illinois' guards don't play super well, and then Kofi could get in foul trouble, that I think is there. And then for the exact same reason you listed for Michigan. So I think Gonzaga and Baylor, like I said, are a tier above, and I don't see them being as susceptible. But into the interesting part where that was promised of pretenders and contenders. So I'll just go through the rest of the top 10 by rank, and we'll give you a little analysis of the team, and then each give kind of what we view them as, a pretender or a contender, and maybe just kind of say where you see them going in the tournament. So let's start with number 5, Iowa, a team that is offensively excellent and has now started to play some really good defense and had a defining win over Ohio State this past weekend in Columbus. Where do you see this team going, and do you see them as a contender or a pretender?
As far as making a deep run, first off, let me quickly say this. With all these teams, I think we'll have a better idea once we see a bracket, because you know how big matchups are. But Iowa, their game, it depends how they're shooting, because they don't guard it well. But when they're shooting, they could play with anyone. So I'm going to say contender with Iowa.
Yeah, and I love Iowa. That's what if you go back far enough on my Twitter at @LeafTulane, for anyone listening, that I wrote a little piece about why I thought Iowa, who was at the time 5th in the Big Ten last year, which was not as deep as it is this year, and 25th in the country, why I thought they'd be a top 5 team because of the continuity. So I'm really high on this team, and for the same reason that you just said, I think they can make an Elite 8. I don't see them being a Final Four team, because I feel like once they play some of these teams that are of the caliber of the ones before, because I think they'll be a 2 seed. Because I don't see them necessarily winning the Big Ten tournament. I think it's really hard for them to be consistently shooting lights out. But I do think their defense getting better really elevates them. If you'd asked me a week ago, I probably would have said pretender. But I think right now, if as far as contenders go, I think that's kind of just talking like Elite 8 type of caliber team. And that's what I see them as. So I'm with you on this one. And another team we saw play a really good game yesterday and has really figured it out as the season's gone along is number 6, West Virginia. This is a team that has totally changed their identity as the year's gone on. And what do you see them as, a contender or pretender? Because they looked really good against Baylor yesterday for the majority of that game.
I'll say contender for West Virginia. I think, who would have thought after losing Oscar Tshiebwe, this team would probably, I think they're better without him. I don't think anyone thought that was going to happen. And Huggins said it too. They said, what's going to happen now? He said, we're going to win more games. So that was, he knew something, he knew this team was going to get better. So it's given some of those other guys a chance to take on a bigger role, which they've done great in. Like you said, McBride's really good. He's terrific. Culver's, I think Culver's one of the better post players in the Big 12. And he's really physical. So yeah, West Virginia, I'll say contender for them.
Yeah, and I'm with you. And what's interesting is I remember Scott and I, the guy I do this podcast with, we said that maybe it's addition by subtraction. We were kind of half-heartedly saying that. And then we saw Huggins is the same thing you just referenced. And we were like, okay, he's just playing tough to get here. But Bob Huggins is a really good coach. And he figured a way to play with this team. For those of you who don't know, West Virginia was known for being press Virginia. They're trapping. They're playing super fast. Just think of Javon Carter, Nathan Adrian, guys flying on the floor. This team is tough, is scrappy, but they're not doing it in the same way. They're scoring. And guys like Taz Sherman and Sean McNeil are really helpful. And those are my two keys. That they're shooting, because they hit some tough shots, but they also hit a lot of open shots created by Culver and McBride. So I think we probably agree there that this is an Elite Eight caliber team, and we saw them play a Baylor team that was really hungry, really determined, and led most of the way. So I'm with you on this one. That, to me, that's a contender. Number 7, Ohio State, ranked as high as number 4, a team that I didn't see coming personally. And do you see them as a contender or pretender? Because they're on a 3-game losing streak right now.
I'll say pretender for Ohio State. I do like their team. I think they got a solid team. They don't have a lot of size. They don't guard well, but EJ Liddell is really good. Washington's, he's good, but their size I kind of question their size. They don't, even their center, they don't have much. It's the size thing for me, and not a great defensive team. So I'll go pretender.
Yeah, I'm with you on that one. And I think a lot of this, you guys are gonna say that we kind of talked about these before. We haven't. I think we just see the game similarly. And if you look at even Ken Palm rankings, that Ohio State's constantly flirted with, the top 5 offensively and around the 60s defensively. And what I saw against Iowa is the first game, they had a really nice closing stretch, and Chris Holtman did a great job. Just tactically, they got open shots, and Iowa had a few defensive breakdowns where Justin Ahrens hit some threes. But if I'm Ohio State, I see that my 2 centers are 6'7", 6'8", really tough dudes. But all these other teams have really good big guys. You look at the top teams in the country. You got Drew Timme, and Baylor's the exception. They don't have a superb big man, but they play so tough, and they've got Mark Vidal, who's just unbelievable as a glue guy. And then you've got Kofi Coburn, Hunter Dickinson, Luka Garza, and it's a big driven thing. And then their guards aren't superb to compensate like Baylor's guards are. They've got CJ Walker and Washington, they're really good players, but they aren't to the caliber of some of these other guys. So I'm with you. I think that their defense will catch up to them. And this is a team that I think has overperformed so far in the season.
Agree.
And here's another team that I didn't see coming. 2 football powerhouses. We got Alabama. Alabama is number 8 in the country in basketball. Ohio State is number 7 in the country in basketball. We're talking basketball here, not football. So do you see the Alabama Crimson Tide as a pretender in basketball?
Man, this is a tough call on Alabama, because I've seen them look really good, and then I've seen them miss shots and not look great. I'm going to go pretender on Alabama. And the reason why is, they have been good defensively, but they take so many threes, and those off shooting nights kind of scare me with Alabama. And the other thing about Alabama, they don't get a lot of easy baskets. You know what I mean? It's a lot of spread, a lot relying on a lot of threes. That kind of worries me. Not much in the post either, kind of like I referred to with easy baskets. So I think after that first LSU game, they put on just a shooting clinic, and everyone jumped on Alabama, and they've been good all year. But that kind of worries me with Alabama. So I'll go pretender on them.
Yeah, I'm with you again on this one. And this is one that I was really hoping a lot of people would jump on the Alabama bandwagon, and I could be the separate one here. And maybe that is the case, and we just see it differently. But I see the exact same thing as you. They shoot so many 3-pointers that, like we said with Iowa, if your team key is 3-point shooting, it's hard to hit threes in 6, 7 straight games. It's very difficult to consistently shoot very well and defend at a caliber that if you're shooting poorly, that you get enough transition baskets, because that's the only other type of basket that Alabama really prioritizes. And they have some really good players. I love Herb Jones. Herb Jones is one of my favorite players in the nation. But I think they've got a lot of players that are, I wouldn't say selfish. That's not really the word I'm looking for. But they seem to shoot the first shot. They're not a team that, like, I was a good example again. And I was very unselfish that sometimes you'll see Joe Wieskamp have an open three and he's like, oh, I'm going to throw it to Connor McCaffrey, and then he's going to feed it to Garza and we'll get a layup instead of a pretty good looking three. And they shoot the best shot, and Alabama shoots the first shot. And I think that hurts them. So I'm going to go pretender as well. This is a team that I think is very dangerous, though. That's a team that I think is a solid 2 seed. I just don't see them on the same level as some of the ones we've labeled as contenders. Yeah. One that's similar to me in this sense is that they're really good defensively is the Houston Cougars. Kelvin Sampson's a great coach, makes great adjustments. But do you think they have the talent to be a contender?
I'm going to say contender, actually, for Houston. And one of the big things that happened just recently with Houston is, I don't know even how many people know this, they got Fabian White back. I think I think he's played 4 games. Going into the season, I was really high on him. And, it sounded like he was going to be out for the year. And the fact that they got him back, I think I'm going to track kind of his numbers and see what kind of production, but so far he's looked pretty good. So, I like Quentin Grimes. I like Sasser. Kind of worries me a little, like you said, up front. They don't have a whole lot of size. They do play really hard. They defend. Kelvin Sampson, he's been really good at Houston. And like I said, getting Fabian White back, I think, is that extra big body that kind of puts me over the edge to that contender status with them. Kind of like a, Elite Eight, possible Final Four caliber team.
Yeah, and this is one that I'm kind of in a wait and see mode, and I know it's cheating a little bit, but I have these worries. Like at the beginning of the year, the first time I saw them play Texas Tech, I was like, wow, this is a really good team that no one's on the same page with. That I think that they could be really good. And then I watched them play some of these American games, and I feel like their offense should be more dynamic in the caliber against the caliber of opponents that they are playing. And that's no slight at the American. It's just that, in the Big Ten, I expect the games to get mucked up with physicality. The American's kind of a more open, free-flowing game. And I'm going to go with pretender on this one, but this is one I'm not confident in because I love Kelvin Sampson. If you guys caught the Tuesday takeover of last week where I ranked coaches, Kelvin Sampson was very higher than a lot of blue blood coaches that you guys would think of sooner. So Kelvin Sampson's the reason I'm tentative about this, but I think in terms of talent, I think they rely on a lot of guard production hitting tough shots. I don't think they get great shots. And then their defense is so much of what they do. Defense travels, and I think they'll be a tough out. I just don't know if I trust their offense quite enough. So I think that'll be one where we disagree. But like you said, the bracket is so important because if they play a team that is offensively inept, I will take Houston because their defense is so good. It's a matchup dependent thing, but I'll vary on this one. I'm going to say pretender. Last one, we've got a team that is very well coached, very highly ranked in terms of my coaches poll. Villanova Wildcats, number 10 in the country. I was very low on them from the start of this year when I saw them play their opening game against Boston College, and I thought, I must be being too harsh. But I'll give away my answer to this one. I don't see this Villanova team contending like the old Jay Wright teams. What's your read on them?
Well, just to touch off what you said, I mean, Jay Wright to me is, you can argue he's maybe the best coach in the country, definitely up there in the top 3. I mean, he's awesome, and he gets his players to, play into his system. They don't take bad shots. They move the ball. So they have that going for them. But I agree with you. I don't think they have the talent on this team to, make a really deep run. They're not overly athletic. They don't guard. They get beat a lot off the dribble defensively. I worry about their bench. They don't get much from their bench. Like Swider can come in and, he can knock down some shots, but they don't get much from their bench. And yeah, I agree with you. I'm more of a pretender this year on Villanova, and I think that's probably the first time in a few years that me and you would say that, but this doesn't remind us of a vintage, I would say, Villanova team. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. And when you think of that championship, the most recent championship team, that was a juggernaut. So I know you know that, but for those of you listening, uh, I'm not saying that they're of the caliber. I'm not comparing them to the 2018 Villanova team led by Jalen Brunson, Dante DiVincenzo, and Mikal Bridges, Omari Spellman. I'm not saying that. I'm saying of a team that can contend, because even in the years they haven't won, they've been really good. They were upset in the second round in 2017, and they were a contender in my eyes. This team, to me, is not of the caliber of their last year team, where they lost Sadiq Bey, and I think a lot of people were lower on that team than recent Villanova teams. So yeah, I'm with you on this one all the way. I think that they're so reliant on Cullen Gillespie, and Cullen Gillespie is a great player, but he's not the one you want to be scoring 20 points a game. You want 14 points, 6 rebounds, 6 assists, and intangible plays from him. You don't want him to have to score 20 in order for you to win.
Yeah, and one more thing. In the preseason, one of the other things I thought this Villanova team would be better is I thought Brian Antoine would come in and be healthier. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And he hasn't really played all year. So, coming out of high school, he was supposed to be a first-round draft pick, and I thought he would be, would he turn into that NBA caliber wing this year? And he hasn't been healthy all year. So that, to me, really lowers their ceiling, not even having him as basically part of their rotation.
Yeah, and to touch on that, I think one thing that differentiates them from even last year's team is obviously Sadiq Bey was a first-round draft pick and a very good player in his own right, but we haven't seen a huge leap from Jermaine Samuels. You get a transfer in Caleb Daniels, and you've got Justin Moore, but they're not those guards and wings there. They can shoot the ball and they can all do nice things, but they're not of the first-round caliber that Villanova's had, whether they be Mikal Bridges, who was a number 8 pick and is playing great for the Suns right now. And he was more defensively oriented. These guys they don't have a skill that is defining. Sadiq Bey was a great shooter and could defend. That's what made him a first-round pick. And then you had guys like DiVincenzo. He was a bench guy. People know of him because he played well in the Final Four, but he came off the bench. And the beauty of that team is they were so deep. They moved the ball so well. This year, it feels more stagnant. They've got Jeremiah Robinson Earl, Colin Gillespie, and then they stand around them and try to move the ball. And because Jay Wright coaches them so well, they're still a good team, but they're not a team that I can see winning the national championship or even being a Final Four team.
Yeah, I agree.
All righty, so that's the top 10, and we see the game pretty similarly here, but I've got a few questions that might lead us astray, could keep us on the same page. Outside of the top 10, who do you think is the biggest contender? So these are 3 and 4 seeds, it could be even lower, but not the usual suspects necessarily.
I think Florida State is a very intriguing team just because they have a lot of depth. They're very physical. They're very long. So I would say Florida State would be one of those teams I think can cause teams trouble. Another team they haven't played great lately, but I'm not giving up on is Texas, just because of the talent Texas has. They have two projected NBA bigs. They have 3 guards that can, take you off the dribble. Brock Cunningham is kind of like their wild card X factor player, and Shaka Smart, he needs to make a bit of a run this season, or the pressure's really going to be on him. So yeah, I like Texas. I like their talent, but like I said, they need to start playing better. And Oklahoma is another team that I think can be dangerous due to the fact that, kind of like you said, guards win in March, and it's so true. And they have guys that can spread you out and knock down shots. Austin Reeves, I really like. So yeah, I think Oklahoma could be a dangerous team too. So I would say those 3. I'm still waiting to see Oregon. Oregon is a team I'm also intrigued by. I know they've had injuries like all season, so they haven't really played all together. Will Richardson just came back for them, and he looked good, and then he got hurt again. So I'm intrigued by Oregon as well. So probably those 4 teams I would say. Oh, one more team I would say, San Diego State is also, one of those teams that I think can make a run.
Yeah, and I'm with you on a lot of those. And I anticipated you'd like Oregon because you've been high on them all year. So I had a question that I was queuing up for you as one of the lower seeds to pull some upsets, and I was anticipating that as an answer. But I can also see them being I wouldn't say a contender, but a team that can make the Elite Eight from a 10 spot. If anyone could, that seems like a team that could in my eyes. One that I want to highlight that is an interesting one because they're not necessarily going to be in the tournament, but due to investigations is Oklahoma State. First and foremost, actually, I'll say that Florida State was my answer to this question. They're number 11, so that is cheating a little bit, being like, okay, that's the next best team. But ever since Florida State has been like 25th in the country, and I watched Scotty Barnes, MJ Walker, and once Leonard Hamilton found out like the rotations, how to get some shooters onto the floor while still remaining to be very athletic. You see Anthony Polite, you're seeing Sardar Calhoun, and then Raekwon Gray has taken a leap as like a point forward along with Scotty Barnes. This is a team that before they played Virginia, I texted some friends and I said, I really like Virginia. I love Tony Bennett. I think he's the best coach in the country. But I said Florida State's going to win this game because this matchup is not very good for Virginia. They don't have the athletes to match up with Florida State. So Florida State is kind of my team. And honestly, if I'm trying to be different on a bracket, I take maybe 3 of those 1 seeds, depending on which side I see. And whichever side has Florida State, unless it's Gonzaga or Baylor. So if it's Illinois or Michigan, I might take Florida State as a 4 seed to beat the 1 and like a Sweet 16 type of deal. That's how high I am on them. But the one I was talking about was Oklahoma State. It is a team that I'm very high on. I don't know if they'll be allowed to play in the tournament, but the way it's looking, I think the NCAA would be pretty idiotic to not allow Cade Cunningham to have this spotlight. 1, it makes money for them, and 2, Oklahoma State could be a legitimate Elite Eight team in my eyes. We're seeing them make strides, and I think I was early to the party on this. I saw them defend and really trouble Texas Tech and Kansas earlier in the year. They win close games because they have a closer in Cade Cunningham. You're seeing Caleb Boone. They're winning these games. They beat Oklahoma, a team that I agree with you that I think is one of my teams listed here. They beat Oklahoma twice in a week without Isaac Likely, who I think you and I would both agree is their second best player. And so this is a team that I would very much not like to play. I had them as my 8 seed like a while ago and saying like, oh man, if they play a 1 seed, that 1 seed's going to have a dogfight. And now they're probably a 4 or 5. So those are my 2 main ones. And then I wanted to list Oklahoma as well, because for the exact reason you said, their backcourt is one of my favorites to watch. Elijah Harkless played Cade Cunningham, and he was the reason Cade Cunningham really struggled to score early in that second Oklahoma State battle. So yeah, those are 3 teams that I really like, and I will probably be taking to advance far in my bracket, probably further than most people do. And I kind of had a feeling about the Oregon ones, but I'll ask you a question that I hinted at is, do you see any teams that pull upsets, whether it be an 8-1, a 10-7, that can win 2 rounds? Any teams that are beyond a 7 seed that are making the Sweet 16 or Elite 8?
I think the Mountain West teams are pretty dangerous. You know, depending on who gets in there, like Boise State is, you know, they have some talent there. Utah State, to me, I'm still intrigued by it because they have so much size, and Kada is a huge presence down low. So the Mountain West teams, even Colorado State is solid. Like I said, San Diego State already, I like them. So those teams, I think, are really dangerous teams. Outside of that, like depending on where like a Loyola is seated for a mid-major, I think they're tough to prepare for because they slow it down on you. They don't take bad shots, and they're really good defensively. So
yeah, for those of you who haven't watched Loyola, they have a big man named Cameron Krutwig who I liken to a bit of like a Nikola Jokic of college basketball. And they also play defense like Virginia of years past, where they really slow the game down, play defense with their offense at times, and then their defense is elite. They're the best defense according to Ken Palm efficiency. I really like that pick. And one more that I wanted to put out there is UConn. I think UConn could be a 10 seed because they were missing James Bouknight for a lot of the season. And when James Bouknight plays, they're 9-3 right now. I think that's a team that I see as more of like a 6 seed rather than 11 that could be misseeded. And then I don't know if this is just deference to Tom Izzo, but I assume Tom Izzo and Michigan State are going to make the tournament. That's not a team I'd want to play if they're a 12 seed and and you're a 5 early on. And so those are 3 I see. And I really do like the Utah State prediction because Neemias Keita and Justin Bean is a great front court, and they make some shots with their back court. So that kind of wraps up where I've got a lot of the bracketology, these contenders, but we've got some All-American prognostications that we're going to try to go through. That we texted a little bit beforehand that our first team, I'll read it out here, is a one that we kind of agree with, and I think will be what happens. But then from then on, it is a crapshoot. We don't know what's going to happen. So I'll read out the first team and just give me your thoughts on some of these players afterwards. So the first team that we've got here is Jared Butler of Baylor, Ayo Dosunmu of Illinois, Cade Cunningham of Oklahoma State, Corey Kispert of Gonzaga, and Luka Garza at center from Iowa. What do you think of that first team All-American team?
I think that's pretty consensus probably across the board with what it's going to be. I mean, yeah, this is kind of a clear cut to me, top 5 first team All-American group. I see we have 2 Big Ten players in there. We have two Big 12 players, and then you have Kispert from Gonzaga, who hasn't lost a game all year. I think those are the clear-cut top 5. I would be surprised if someone else got in there in that first team.
Yeah, me too. And I tried to think of a way to slip a guy like Marcus Carr in, who's had an awesome season, but I just don't think there's a way in. So speaking of Marcus Carr, I'll read out my second team. As for my second team, I've got Marcus Carr of Minnesota, Jalen Suggs of Gonzaga, Davion Mitchell. I have him edging out Herb Jones, who I tried to fit a way to get him onto the second team. I just couldn't find a way. Trace Jackson Davis at the power forward, and Evan Mobley of USC as a center. I think we're gonna have a few differences on this one. Can you tell me what you think of this team, and then if you have any differences of opinion on this one, please let me know and who you have on your team.
Yeah, that sounds like a pretty good second team to me. I'm not as high on Marcus Carr for my second team, even though he's had a big year, and I mean he's kind of been that guy for Minnesota. He's hit some huge shots. So I don't disagree with that, but I think it's tough to keep Kofi Cockburn off that second team for me. I have Kofi Cockburn on my second team. I think for me it's tough to keep him off of that second team. So I'll read you mine. I have Davion Mitchell, which you also had. I have Jalen Suggs. I believe you had him. I have Kofi Cockburn, like I mentioned. I have Drew Timme, which is kind of a stacked Gonzaga first and second team, but I mean, he's had a great year. And I have Quentin Grimes actually on my second team, which may be a big surprise, but I mean, Houston's been a top 10 team. He's been their best player. So yeah, I have Quentin Grimes on there.
That one does surprise me a little bit. I like the pick, and I think a lot of people don't appreciate how good Houston is. I wouldn't consider myself one of those people who hasn't watched them because I've enjoyed watching them. I just had a really hard time leaving off Marcus Carr on my second team because I'm point guard driven. I think the best teams always have a good point guard, and Marcus Carr in my eyes has been one of the top 4 point guards in the nation. So it'll be hard for me to leave him off. I like that Quentin Grimes pick and rewarding the best player on winning teams. That's the philosophy. And then as for Kofi, the other place where we didn't have the same exact player, I tried to play Kofi over Mobley. I had both of them. I kind of went back and forth. The reason I went with Mobley is because he's the best player on his team, and that's no fault of Kofi, obviously, with Ayo Dosunmu. But I think that he plays such a big role. Without Evan Mobley, USC is a very mediocre team. With Evan Mobley, they're a top 20 team. And you could say the same with Kofi, but I feel like you can attribute a lot of that to Ayo. So that's just I like the pick of Kofi, and I was kind of just picking. I went with Trace Jackson Davis over him because I love what Trace Jackson Davis did, and without him, Indiana is terrible. And they're not great anyway, but he's dealing with the worst shooting team in the country, in my opinion. Like, they can't hit anything from the perimeter, constantly double, and he's putting up 20 and 10 every night. So I like those picks, and I very much see where you're coming from. As for the third team, I have a few of those players that you just mentioned. So my third team, I've got Carlik Jones of Louisville, David Duke of Providence, which I think might be a little bit of a surprise. I've got Miles McBride of West Virginia. I've got Herb Jones of Alabama and Drew Timme of Gonzaga. In retrospect, I would like to try to slide David Duke probably out of there and put in Kofi or Hunter Dickinson. But I wanted to give a little shout out to Providence and David Duke because I don't think a lot of people know of them. But that's one I'm kind of weighing here. But what do you think of that team? And then let me know what you have for your third team.
Yeah, yours is pretty similar to my third team. I have Miles McBride. I mean, West Virginia's had a really good year, and he's been awesome. So I have Miles McBride. I took Marcus Carr as my other guard on that list from Minnesota. I have Herb Jones on there because the impact he's had on Alabama, not just doing everything with, rebounding, distributing the ball, scoring, but a really elite defender. I went with Trace Jackson Davis from Indiana. I believe he's averaging like 19 points, 9 rebounds. He's had a really, really good year. And like you said, he's what Indiana really, really goes to. He's their big producer. And I was torn on this last pick, and I'm going to surprise you. I went with Hunter Dickinson because I think Michigan had to have had a guy on there just because they're a top 3 team in the country. So McBride, Marcus Carr, Herb Jones, Trace Jackson Davis, and Hunter Dickinson. So I think we probably have, of our 15 guys, we probably are only a couple guys off.
Yeah, I think we probably have 12 of the same ones, and with my little addition of Kofi, I think that puts us at 13 of the same ones. I like your pick of Hunter Dickinson on there. The reason I didn't put him on mine is I feel like Franz Wagner is the best player on Michigan, and I think that position wise, both are so stacked that it was hard for me to slip him on Hunter Dickinson on there. Franz Wagner on there, and then I didn't want to put Hunter Dickinson over Franz Wagner, and that is my personal preference of who I believe is the better player, and that may be skewed by who I think has more potential, but I think that is a very reasonable pick, and I understand where you're coming from in putting a top 5 team in the nation without an All-American. I feel like you have to have them because every other team did have a few, if not one. So I'm with you there. I love your teams. I love the Quentin Grimes pick. That is one that shocked me. I was not ready for that one, but I like the recognition for Houston, some mid-major basketball, and I think. I've got one more question, actually. Who do you think is the defensive player of the year? I think it's a question that I ponder a lot because I think I have a guy that is on both of our All-American teams as my guy, but I'm wondering if you've got someone different.
Defensive player of the year. Davion Mitchell would be up there. I'm trying to think who I would go. I mean, Herb Jones has been great. I'll say Herb Jones.
That's a good one. I was going Davion Mitchell. So
okay.
Yeah, no. So I was assuming you'd go with Davion Mitchell or Herb Jones. So I assumed correctly there. I think you can make a great case that Herb might be the more important team defender. I just think that you can't fault Davion for his height, I guess, is my logic. Is that he does so well for his height. He can guard 1 through 3, and Herb can probably guard 1 through 5, and he's very rare that way.
Yeah, and just a couple other guys to touch on our All-American teams. Like I know me not having Evan Mobley was probably your biggest surprise you would have for me. Robinson Earl for Villanova he's been pretty good. And as far as a mid-major guy that I think is having a really good year, but probably won't make it is Charles Bassey from Western Kentucky.
That's a great one. I just think the center's too stacked.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm all aboard that train as well. I love Charles Bassey. I gave him a little shout out on our Player of the Week for our podcast, and I think you were one of the first people that told me Western Kentucky was going to be really good this year. They beat Alabama. That's one team that I actually want to shout out now that you brought it up. This is a little late. I think if Western Kentucky is in the tournament and you have them as a 12 seed, there's always the old cliche like a 12 is going to beat a 5, and whether that's true or not, I don't know. But I'm very tempted, depending the 5 seed, to take Western Kentucky because they've got one of the best bigs in the country. They've got a nice guard, and I think they're a really, really solid team because Charles Bassey is a first-round draft pick type of player on a team that you wouldn't assume to have a first-round draft pick.
Yeah, and one other guy who's had a really good year, who I know we both like watching, is Chris Duarte of Oregon. I think he's been a really good two-way player, and he's had a big year as well. Yeah,
absolutely. And I'm very curious to see how it shakes out in the Pac-12 for Player of the Year. You got Mobley, you got Duarte, you've got McKinley Wright, and so those are some guys that I think have some outside fringe noise and chances of making it. So as always, I really appreciate your time hopping on this podcast. Love talking college hoops. If anyone doesn't know, this is Mark Cundiff, Marky Futures on Twitter. I would say I've learned a lot from just looking at your tweets, that even if I'm thinking the same thing, sometimes you've got some takes that I look at and I think, wow, I hadn't thought of that, but I do agree. And so I highly recommend following Mark on Twitter, getting to know him, and as always, thank you for hopping on and chatting some hoops with me.
Thanks a lot, Leaf, for having me on. We had a great conversation. Really excited that it's March, and can't wait to talk to you throughout this NCAA tournament.
Yeah, I can't wait either, and I really appreciate you for spending some time on the college sports side. So check it out, and everyone give Mark a follow that follows our podcast. He knows a ton about college hoops.